I am Sasha Borenstein, and I have been a teacher my whole adult life. And I was trained in special education at Teachers College Columbia and worked in the Los Angeles area my entire adult life. And I worked in public schools and charter schools, but I also had a clinic which I created and ran for 36 years, the Kelter Center in Los Angeles. And we worked with everything from children through adults who had learning differences, learning disabilities, dyslexia, whatever title you want to give it. But most of the time we were doing remediation in the area of literacy. And so it really has been my learning, a lifelong learning, and I've been blessed to learn with people like Charles and Pat Lindemood and Nancy Bell and Maureen Aumann, and done a lot of study with many people who work with the language exclamation point. And so I've been on this quest of how do we translate the really good research that we do have and continue to augment in the science of reading into practical, what am I going to do in my classroom tomorrow? I think that's the niche and the interest that I have. So we put this out because we wanted more people to know about some of the training courses that we're doing. And one of the things that I have a year ago, when everything was in the worst chaos pretty much in my life, I said, oh, I need to do something about this. And the one thing I know how to do is to support teachers and teach literacy. And that began this whole year's working with teachers all over the United States and Canada and the world, and really working in depth and in an integrated way. And so tonight is going to be a snippet, an appetizer, a tantalizer for the people who haven't been here before, and for the people who have been in this group. I tried to figure out something new and interesting that would be helpful to you also. So it's not going to be what we had in class, but it's going to augment what we've done. One of the things that we did, because we really have since the beginning of doing these trainings, the first one that Michelle was on, I just said, whoever wants to come, come. And we had 25 people, right? And then the next time, one of the things that I did is I begged all of my friends to do scholarships so teachers could come. And that's the one that Julian was in, right? And then I happen to have a couple of angels in my life, and those angels said, oh, well, you need some more money for teachers, Sasha? So when we put out the announcement for this, what we did is we said the first 8 people to sign up, and there's tonight and then next week, those people are eligible for $125 of scholarship. The course itself costs $450. So that scholarship for those first 8 people will be I'm putting my book in, and then there's a scholarship. So the people who were the first 8, I'm going to say their names, and I need you to decide if you're going to sign up for the course. My whole thing is I know teachers work hard. I know teachers need support, and I'm trying to do that in as many ways as I can figure out. So let's jump in and have some fun with literacy. I'm going to share my screen. One of the things that I want you to know is if you have a question, I want to hear it, and I would like to be able to answer it as well as I can. We have the chat room also. And I really enjoy seeing faces. So Jennifer Serda, could you let me see your face? Because any teacher reads faces. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, I'm going to do all these things so I can see everything. So we are talking about demystifying spelling. And that's what we're going to spend an hour with. So here's some interesting factlets. So what we've learned from the literacy research is when Cook and Slee and Young in 2008, they talked with teachers and they say, well, how many of you guys teach spelling? And how much of the time do you teach spelling? 4% of reading instructional time in that survey was spent on teaching spelling. I don't think that's enough. Another thing that we know from the research is that how we teach spelling is based on the same thing of how we teach reading. We need to teach the letters and their sounds. That's called phonology, the study of sound. We need to teach orthography, which I call the kosher patterns of how letters string together in English. We need to teach morphology, the meaning of parts of words. And all of that must be taught explicitly and integrated from the beginning. English spelling is complex. There are 26 letters and 44 phonemes or sounds, and there are 250 different spelling patterns for those sounds. However, there are some patterns that are very, 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 very common, and that's what we should rely on. In my spelling book, I picked the types, the very frequent spellings, not the esoteric, 1%ers. I love this word. And I think this is something that we really, really want to talk with our students about. The English language is a morpho-phonemic language. What could that possibly mean? That means that in the history and the evolution of our language, the meanings and the history of the words were maintained or adjusted, but the spelling and the reading that we have today has a history, and it really reflects that history. For instance, in the word sign, S-I-N, three phonemes, but we have 4 letters. There's a G in there. Don't hear it at all. But if you go to the word signature, and the meaning of sign and signature is comparable, is linked, you can see why there's a G in sign. So we need to teach our students about spelling and reading, and I'm going to emphasize spelling because spelling is harder. But we need to teach it in an engaging, exciting, thoughtful interchange with our students. And you're going to get a little experience of that tonight. Spelling and reading are 2 sides of the same coin. They are not very different. When you spell a word, you have to hear it. You have to say it, because if you don't say it correctly, you can't spell it correctly. You have to segment, in other words, hear the whole word and pull it apart into its component sounds. That's a phonemic awareness term. You have to keep those sounds, my fingers are the sounds in the word, in the correct sequence. And you have to use working memory to do that. Working memory is, can I remember this as I'm doing it? You then have to map the letters onto the sounds, translate the sounds into letters, and then you have to consider, are there any syllable types that are changing the spelling? Are there any orthographic patterns that are influencing it? If you read, and you're going to see a lot of commonalities here, you're seeing the word, and you have to translate the letters into sounds. You have to keep the sounds in the correct sequence and use your working memory to do that. You have to consider the orthographic patterns and the syllable types and the morphemes, and then you have to blend the sounds into a word. And so you can see how many commonalities there are there between spelling and reading. So Catherine Snow tells us that reading and spelling build and rely on the same mental representation, and knowing the spelling of the word makes the representation sturdy and accessible. Have I convinced you that you need to teach spelling? And probably speaking to the choir, right? Okay. So another person who I just really like to study with is Stanislaus Dehaene. How many of you guys have heard him or read his book? Stanislaus Dehaene is phenomenal, right, Liz? Right? And he is a Frenchman. He talks about the brain and how we use the different parts of the brain on the left hemisphere to create a circuit, not just one place. It's a whole number of different parts of the brain to read and to spell. It is the same circuit. So, that's why I think we need to teach reading and spelling together in the same lesson. Now, if I'm working with my students, I must know what they know, what they confuse, and what they do not know. What letters do they know in the consonants and the vowels? What spelling patterns do they know, not know, or confuse? What syllable types do they know, not know, or confuse? And do they understand the morphemes in words? So I'm going to use formal and informal tests. I happen to really like the Wechsler achievement test because it allows me to look at real words and nonsense words. It has my students spell and read. It also gives me a fluency and a comprehension evaluation. That's why I like it. But the test of written spelling has been around for a long time, and I can use that as a more informal test. Or Words Their Way online, you can get their test and just give it to them. It doesn't matter what test you use, and I'm sure each of you has other tests that you use. But what is important is to say, what were the mistakes that this student made? Did they make mistakes with the letters and the sounds? Was it a phonemic awareness mistake? Did they leave out a sound? Did they substitute one sound for another? Did they put in sounds that didn't belong there? Did they spell rain, R-A-N-E, because that's an orthographic mistake? And do they know the different morphemes and how to spell them and what they mean? So I need to know that about my students before I can start teaching. Does anybody have another test, either formal or informal, that they use to get a baseline on their students?
I do running records, especially when I at the onset of meeting my students.
Okay.
Like right now, I'm teaching the summer session, so I ran running records, and I gotta figure out what percentage of mistakes they make in a minute, and that gives me a little bit of an idea, pretty decent idea as to how fast.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part,
Oh,
Gustavo.
I'm sorry, but I only focus on speed. So I tell my kid, you know what? You run into a word that you cannot pronounce well, just keep going. I'm just worried about speed.
So Gustavo, that tells me about fluency.
Yeah,
It tells me about accuracy, but it doesn't tell me what they know, what they confuse, and what I need to teach. Do you see how that's different? So one of the things that I do is I've written out, and you can see this in my book, but you can just write all the consonants, the single consonants, the digraphs, the consonants and the vowels. And I use it as a spelling test if I have a group of kids, because that's harder. And then I know who knows the sound of I, and who knows all the spellings for k, and who knows what oi is spelled like. That gives me a different piece of information. That's what I'm looking for in order to teach spelling, because I have to see their mistakes to analyze them. Okay? Anybody else use a different testing Jennifer Guzman, please.
I use a couple. Our school, of course, has ESGI because of during distance learning. That one worked really well, and they put up their own kind of spelling, which is great. It was really good. And I
Uh-huh.
do have the Woodcock Johnson.
Yep.
I do have the IMSE Orton Gillingham because I'm
Great.
trained intermediate and in the. I've been doing.
All of those are really helpful, aren't they?
Yeah, I have plenty of resources for
Good.
that. Yeah.
The two that you mentioned, I don't know. Would you send them to me in an email, please?
Which ones? The
The-
Woodcock or the IMSE and
I
the
know the woodcock. It's the IMSE. I'm
and
not familiar with that. Okay.
sure.
Thank you. Because I'm always interested in learning more, what we can use. This was a slide from one of the articles that I have put in the bibliography. This is a really interesting slide, guys, because again, if I can look at my mistakes that my students make, it tells me a lot about where I have to start. So these are the stages of development in spelling errors. So an early emergent speller is pretty much scribbling. And then a late emergent learner, no matter what their age is going to have beginning consonants. And an early letter name alphabetic speller is going to have the final consonants. So if they make mistakes in these areas, you say, oh, wait, I got to start with initial consonants. Oh, no, I can do initial and final. Or can I do the medial? So this like timeline of the development of spelling skills can really help us when we start to set goals for our students. Now we're going to get into how can we teach spelling differently on research, based on research. And this is really a paradigm shift. We're asking our students to think about patterns linguistically and morphologically instead of memorize their spelling words for Friday. We're changing our own behaviors. We want to question as much as we can instead of telling all the ideas. If I say I before E, except after C, except in words like neighbor and way, how many people will understand that? Few. But if I build an experiment and you figure out those patterns, it's going to be sticky. It's going to be meaningful for you. The other thing in this paradigm shift of how we teach spelling and reading is that we want our students to keep working until they master a skill. They can't do 20 words and then another 20 words the next week and another 20 words the next week that are random and chaotic and don't make sense to them because they won't stick. They might stick for Friday, but they won't stick for the next month. So we have to shift from being Friday spellers to linguistic explorers with our students. And how we do this is really based on how our language is built. So in the 1960s, Hannah, Hodges, and Rudolph were some researchers, and what they did is they took 17,000 of the most common words in written texts over the different grades, and they had an old-time computer, and they said to the computer, sort. And what they found is that the English language is highly, I'm talking 96%, predictable. A lot of people say, oh no, English doesn't make any sense. It does, but you have to know the letters and their sounds. You have to know the location of the sound within the word. Does this come in the beginning, middle, or end of a word? And also which letters abut each other, influence each other. I call that the position principle. And then we also have to know the language of origin. And so when they analyze these words, 50% of all the words they stuck in there were predictable based on just the letters and the sounds. Another 34 were predictable except for one sound, and if you started to put some of those orthographic patterns in there, those letters became transparent. There were only 4% of the English words in this study which were truly irregular. We need to tell our kids that. They need to know that English is not chaotic. They need to know that they can think about this. So we want to teach them the position principle, which is where does this sound come, the beginning, middle, or end of a word, and what letters influence the spelling. Like C is a good example of that, right? If C has an I after it, it says S. If C has an A after it, says K, 100% of the time. So the position principle is really important. We also need to know what are the possible spellings of a sound, and then what's the most probable. And one of the references that I sent in your handout is Edward Fry of the Fry list. You guys know the Fry list, right? He redid Hannah's study, and he made it much simpler, and it is really helpful, guys, because you can say, what are the possible spellings of this sound, and what's the most probable? And he's got 2 pages in that like 10-page document that are like gold. We're going to use some of that today. The protection principle is based on the fact that a one-letter single vowel, its sound is changed easily by the letters that come after it, but we can use spelling patterns to protect it. We're not going to get into that today, but that explains a whole lot of rules like K, CK, CH, TCH, GE, DGE, all floss rules. All of those are explained by this protection principle. We also need to know the language of origin, Anglo-Saxon, Latin, Greek, etc. And we need to share this with our students. And we need to say, our spelling is based on patterns, and it makes sense. And we can think about it, and we can discover why we spell words the way we spell them. And it can be fun, guys. The people who've been in my class before know it's fun. Michelle?
I just wanted to share that this year I have to use Fontes and Pinnell, and one of the words is machine. And because I knew that I could say it's a French word, and that's why the CH isn't saying. So it is really interesting, and it does help with reading too.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. Okay, so in this new conceptual science of spelling, what do I include in my lesson? 1, I have to know the linguistic concepts behind the pattern. And I have to tell my kids that. I have to say, today we're going to be talking about the letter C. C is a consonant that happens to have 2 sounds. We're going to figure out why it has 2 sounds and what are the markers that help us spell that or read that. Then I want to have specific questions to ask my students, because if I ask them questions that elicit the patterns, they will be able to figure it out. What words do I want to include? I do not want to include exceptions in my first lesson. I want to then, after I've explicitly and directly taught this spelling pattern and reading pattern, I want my students to read, spell, do phonemic awareness, and fluency. And I like to have my students create a word study guidebook, which is their own book that has no pages, nothing written in it, and they enter their learning into it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for a volunteer. This is kind of how I do my classes, guys, who's going to help me teach part of phonology. And is there someone who would be willing to do that? Maybe Misty or Jennifer. Would one of you be willing to do that with me? I'm sorry. I'll do it with you, Jennifer Guzman. You just volunteered. Okay. Will you unmute yourself, sweetie?
Sure, no worries.
Okay. This is the letter S. And it says S. Could you please say that for me? Thank you. When you said S, are you using your lips or your tongue to say that sound? S.
My tongue.
What part of your tongue are you using? Can you explain that to me?
I'm using my tongue against my teeth.
You know what? I agree with you completely. And that your tongue, they're doing that, it's blocking some of the air. Are you using your lips also when you say S?
A little bit, yes.
Okay. Are they pulled back in a smile or are they puckered forward when you say S?
They're pulled back in a smile.
I agree. Now let's talk about the air. Is there a wide fan of air or just a narrow band of air? Put your hand in front of your face and go, S. Is it a narrow stream of air or a lot of wide air?
It's a little narrow.
I agree. Now, one of the things that's true about consonants is that when we say them, we always use our voice box. Do you know what a voice box is, Jennifer?
I do.
Okay. And so it's right here in our throat, isn't it? Right? And so when we say some letters, some sounds, our voice box wiggles, vibrates, and we call that voiced. This is the feeling, feel it. And really, you could use the palm of your hand and you'll feel it even more. Zzz. Do you feel that vibration?
Yes.
And now let's say this S sound. S. Is it vibrating that way? Or is it unvoiced?
Unvoiced.
I agree. Okay. Now, when the consonants are made in our mouth, one of the things that happens is that two consonants use the same part of the mouth, do the same action, have the same air, but one of them is voiced and one of them is unvoiced. I'm going to give you some letters and I want to see if you can discover who the partner of S is. And I'll help you through it with questions, okay? Could you say this sound? Mm.
Mm.
Are you using your lips there like when you said S? No. How about the air? Is it coming out in a little stream like S when you say mm? What about voicing? Is it voiced when you say mm?
Mm. Yeah.
Okay. But because you're not using the same part of the mouth and you don't have the same air, M, which is the letter that goes along with that sound, is not the partner of S. Let's try this one. Can you say Z? Z. Are you using your lips pulled back and your tongue in the front, like S when you say Z?
Yes.
Is the air coming out in a stream like S when you say Z?
Not as much, a little bit, but not as much.
Can you feel it? Maybe lick your hand. Go zzz. Can you? It's not as much. Do you know why it's not as much? Is it voiced or unvoiced?
It's is voice.
So the voicing is holding some of the air back.
Mm-hmm.
But we're using the same part of our mouth. We have the same air and it's voiced. Guess what? Z is the partner of S.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So thank you, Jennifer, for being such an apt participant. That is a demonstration of how you would teach a consonant pair explicitly and systematically. And you'll notice I didn't always tell her the answer. I asked her a lot of questions, which is how in my book and also in the course we do it. So just to review for teachers, we talked about the letter S, we talked about the air, the mouth, the voicing, and the partner. Now, why is that important? If you have a student of any age, of any intelligence, if they don't have good phonemic awareness, which is can they hear the sounds, if their phonemic awareness is not proficient, they have a hard time differentiating between the pairs. They confuse S and Z when they're spelling. They write bottle with a D instead of a T. They confuse S and SH. But if we teach them how they articulate those sounds, they won't make those mistakes, and we will have a language to talk to them about their mistakes. If you cannot pronounce a word accurately, you can't spell it. And many spelling rules rely on the ideas that we teach in phonology. Like the plural S has a whole lot to do with what Jennifer and I just went over. Okay, so that's phonology in spelling. Let's talk what the possible spellings or orthography is with the letter S. So the possible ways to spell S in English words could be an S, could be a C, could be SS, SE, or PS. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of ways, right? However, there is patterns that we can rely on. This is, again, this is Hannah's work and Fry's work. And in that study, 5,219 words were spelled with an S for that sound. 1,067 words in that study spelled the sound of S with a C. 442 words were spelled with SS, and 186 words were spelled with SE at the end of a word. So, first of all, we are not going to put all of this in the same lesson. We are not going to put, in my estimation, all of these on the wall in my classroom. Fait accompli. I might build a sound wall with my students, and the first thing I put is the S there, and then we'd use that in our spelling, and then I'd put the C there, and we'd construct the wall together. But these possible versus probable ways of spelling really tell me the sequence in which I should be teaching these spelling elements. Okay, so I wanted to show you and demonstrate a spelling pattern. We did sound symbol. Now let's do a spelling pattern. And I'm going to ask, is Liz Hanson, would you do this with me? Would you be my demonstrator, please? Thank you.
I'll give it a go.
Okay, I'll carry us through together, okay? So, I'm going to tell you, Liz, that the letter C is an interesting one because it can represent two different sounds. And we know that the English language is a logical language, and so we're going to figure that out together. So I'm going to read these words to you, and I'm going to ask you the sound of C. And remember, position of other letters that come after a target letter influences their sound. So in the word cat, can you say that word cat?
Cat.
How is the C sounding there? The very first sound. K. Okay, and what letter do we usually associate with that? Is
K.
it a K? And what is the letter that's coming after the C in this word?
A.
I agree. Let's look at the word cut. How is the C sounding in that word?
Cut.
I agree. And what's the letter that's coming after it?
U.
So, So far, we know that an A and a U both influence a C to say k. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
How about an I'm changing. This is something that happens. Once you know these principles and you're working with someone, you can get really creative with this. It's not a, I have to say this, I have to say that. You start to get creative. So we looked at the word cat and we said it had an A after it. What do you think the C in the next word, CAME, is going to say? Yes, why did you think that?
Because the C has an A after it.
Exactly. Now I'm going to go to the next word, caught. What is the C saying in that word, caught? And what's the letter that comes after it?
Oh,
Oh, now we have A and we have U and we have O that influence C to say K. What do you think in the next word, SCAMP, that the C is going to say? And why did you think that?
because there's an A after the C,
And you
just
know,
like a cat.
exactly. Okay, Liz, how did you like doing that with me? Did that feel like you could answer those and that you really were able to think like a linguist?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm going to stop here and thank you, Liz, for helping me with that because I there's so many things that I want to do with you guys today, and we're already at 20 minutes till. But one of the things that's true is I can just teach that pattern and stop there and just work with C when it says K. If I was dealing with an older student or I had more time, I might go through the entire direct lesson looking at when C says K and C says S. But I can break it apart depending on the needs of my students. Okay? So, one of the things that I also like to do is make a step card. And a step card is a memory helper. So, working memory for many of our students is really tricky. And so I write out these things, and I have students who have cards with the step cards all over the place. I have some students that have it all over their wall in their bedroom. But if I were looking at the letter, a step card for the spelling of S with the letter C, this is what I might have on a step card. And I don't tell my students what to put on their step card. We create it together. If the vowel in the word that it is immediately follows the S is an A, O, or U, spell that sound with an S. If the vowel that follows the S sound is an I, E, or Y, it might be spelled with a C. Let's check it. And that's what I want my kids to think about. We're going to use that step card in our spelling lessons all the time. Now let's go to a deeper level of the letter S, morphology. So morphology is the meaning of words, and we are going to be talking about the plural. So who is willing to be my my help volunteer right now? Who hasn't done anything? Anthony, will you do that with me?
Sure.
Thank you. Can you tell me what you already know about the plural's morpheme pattern?
The words can end with an S.
Yes. And when we stick that S on a word, does it change the meaning of that word?
Not really. It just tells us that there are more.
Oh, okay. I agree with you. And that is changing the meaning. It says now that particular base word means more than one. So it does change our meaning. Okay. Anything else you know about the plurals?
The Y can change to an I and it has an E and S.
Yes, and you know that is absolutely taking two rules of spelling and putting it together. And really impressed that you know that part of the rule. Let's talk about just the plurals rule together, okay? So what I've done is I've stuck an S on all of these base words. I'd like to explore with you the sound of that S. Okay? So if I have the word B-O-Y, it says boy. And if I put an S on it, it says boys. Could you repeat that sound for me? Boys.
Boys.
What was the last sound after the oi in the word boys?
Kind of like a Z.
Oh, it was, wasn't it? I put an S on there, but it sounded like a Z, right? Now, I have a question. I haven't, we taught the partners earlier in this lesson, didn't we? What's the relationship between S and Z as far as linguistically?
Um,
Let's say them together. Let's say s, z. Did you use your lips for both of those? S, z.
no. They're voiced.
Oh, one is unvoiced and one is voiced. But look at my mouth.
That's right.
Okay, look at my mouth. S, z. Did I use my lips in the same smile? S, z.
No.
How did it change?
Just it was your throat.
Okay, that's the difference. But when I say s and z, are my lips in the same position? Are your lips in the same position? S, z.
Yes. Yeah, they're in the
Ah,
same.
okay. And is the air pretty much the same? S, z.
Um,
Is it a
yeah, I
street?
think
Yeah.
yeah.
So S and Z are a pair. One is voiced, as you told me, and one is unvoiced. So isn't that interesting that this plural S is saying it's voiced partner with the word boys? How about tops? What's the last sound in the word tops?
An S. Like
An S. And it is unvoiced, isn't it?
yes.
So far, that S has either said S or Z. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
There has to be a reason for this. And we know that letters that sit next to each other influence each other. So let's talk about the P in top. Is it voiced or unvoiced? P, p, feel it.
Unvoiced.
Oh, and the S, tops. Is it voiced or unvoiced?
Also unvoiced.
Oh. Now let's say boys. Is the oi voiced or unvoiced in boys? Oi.
Voiced.
Ah, and that S, was it voiced or unvoiced? Voice.
Yes, also voiced.
Oh. So are you seeing any pattern here yet?
hmm
What's the pattern?
When you place an S after the voice, then the sound is voiced.
Exactly. And when you place an S after the last
Un-
sound in the base where what's unvoiced, how does the S sound?
it's also unvoiced.
Exactly. So there is a pattern here. And if we had time, what I would have done is gone through every word to make sure that that pattern holds true.
Mm.
Okay? Okay. Did you know that before we did that, Anthony?
Actually, I saw it in a book I used a couple years ago when I used to teach adult English learners.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm going to suggest that you need to do it with all your kids in elementary, middle, high school, and college because it makes this sensible. Now, thank you, Anthony. I also would like one more volunteer, please, because I want to talk about another aspect of the plurals. Jillian, will you do this with me?
Yes.
Thank you. So far, we've spelled the plural morpheme with an S, right? In the work that we did with Anthony.
Yes.
Oh,
With an S.
Julie's doing this instead of Jillian. Okay, Julie.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
I thought I heard Julian, but then sometimes
It's
I
okay.
wasn't sure.
That's the Zoom. Okay, I'm gonna do something here. I'm going to do something. If I can, yes, I know I can. I'm going to hide this because I want you to think. Okay, so here we have a word, Julie. The word is box. We know from what we've done with Anthony that the last sound in the base word is going to give us hints as to how the plural sounds, right?
Correct. Correct.
So in the word box, what's the last sound in the word box? Not the letter, sound.
Box.
So
Oh, almost sounds S.
yes, because X says
Box.
now.
X.
Is the S voiced or unvoiced?
Box. Unvoiced.
So, based on what we learned with Anthony, if I stuck a plural S on here, how should it sound?
Like an S.
If I had BOXS, that would say box.
Boxes.
Do you hear the plural if we just stick an S on there?
If you just put an S, the
Mhm.
boxes.
Do you hear the
Yeah.
plural?
No.
No. Oh my
No.
God.
No,
So-
you don't. You just hear the one sound.
So what we're going to do is we're going to put a vowel in there and we're going to spell the plural
Boxes.
boxes with ES, not S.
So the rule is that a non-voiced, the S sounds like an S.
Yes. So what we have to do in order to hear it, we've got to put a vowel in there. Now,
And then okay.
yeah, okay. Okay, because we want to hear it, right?
Yeah.
How about brush?
Brush.
What's the last sound in brush? Sh, right? And is it voiced or unvoiced?
Unvoiced.
Okay. So, based on what we learned with Anthony, the plural S should be the unvoiced sound, right?
Right.
And if we put just an S sound on the end of brush, what would it sound like?
Brush.
Do you hear the plural morpheme? So if we have an SH, we have to add the ES on that to hear the plural morpheme. And when linguistically, for those of you who are really strong in linguistics, S and SH are both called sibilants, hissing sounds. Air is important in the way that we create them. And that's why we have to change the sound and the spelling of this plural morpheme with the continuals, the sibilants. Okay? So, again, for time's sake, because I'm only able to give you tantalizing ideas, when we have these different ending sounds in our base word and we want to make them plural or continuing action, we have to add ES for them, not S, so we can hear the plural morpheme. And one way of understanding this that we work with in our course is to look at what part of my mouth am I using to create the sound, what is the air, what are the relationships in the articulation that affect spelling. Okay, so another part of demystifying spelling is to say this position concept. The vowel spellings that we have on this slide, those vowel spellings are based in position. If the sound of ah comes in the beginning of a word or syllable, we spell it with AU. If it's in the middle, we spell it with AU. If it's at the end, we spell it with AW. The same is true for AIAY, EAEY and Y, OI, OY, OU, OW, OA, OW. If I teach all of these rules consistently, my kids get it. This is, oh yeah, Sasha, this makes sense. It's where it happens in the word. This is conceptual spelling. This is something that Michelle was talking about earlier, which I love, which is the sound of letters, CH, is different in Anglo-Saxon words. In Anglo-Saxon words, it says ch. The CH, the same CH, in Latin words can say k, also in Greek k. And if it's French, it could say sh. So we want to talk with our students about what language did this word come from. Okay, we have a few more minutes for me to answer questions. I want to tell you just one more thing. So if you enjoyed what you learned today and you want to learn more of this, I would invite you to participate in our upcoming lessons that begin in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, where we, over time, learn all of these concepts in wider, more depth kind of way. And does anybody have questions about what we did today and how this might apply to your students? So
none of the first 10 people are here today.
okie dokie. So here's what's happening.
If you are interested in taking the course, put your name in the chat and I will get information to you.
And I'm going to say, because a lot of you have been here before, but if you're interested in taking the course, the first 4 people to say, yes, I'm going to do it and pay for it, you get the scholarship of $125.
And you have to pay tonight.
Yeah. Once you've taken a course from me, you can come to any other course and audit it. Gail, who's on screen now, has done that repeatedly, and that's wonderful. And Michelle has done it, and so is Julian, and they come back for more. So those people who've never had a course, you have the advantage of having come and visited this evening, gotten tantalized, and if you would like to continue to study with this group and with me, I would love it. And if you would like to participate in the course, please let us know.